Millionaire comes home early, finds his son with the new maid, and the truth will shock you. The late afternoon rain tapped against the glass windows of Manhattan's skyline as Daniel Whitmore, a successful 38-year-old architect, signed off the final blueprints of the day. For the past 2 years, his life had revolved solely around work. His architecture firm thrived, luxury projects graced the magazines, but deep inside, Daniel carried a hollow emptiness nothing could fill. Since the day Emily passed away in a car accident, Daniel had buried himself in work. He stayed late at the office, signed contracts, sketched new projects, always finding ways to fill the hours so he wouldn't have to face the cold bedroom or the empty chair at the dinner table. Work had become his mask against grief, but it also turned him into a distant father. Ethan, his only child, carried the loss in a very different way. At just 5 years old, he had no words to express the pain. Instead, he withdrew, became unreachable, hostile to every form of care. 6 nannies came and went in as many months. Each one quit, calling Ethan impossible to handle. He refused to speak, hid under tables, and burst into tantrums over the smallest triggers. The busier Daniel became, the wider the gap between father and son grew. Daniel sighed heavily as he recalled his most recent conversation with Mrs. Thompson. The 60-year-old woman, who had worked for the family for over a decade, was desperate. "Mr. Whitmore, the boy won't accept anyone. I've hired a new housekeeper to help with the chores. At least this way I can focus more on him, but I truly don't know what else to do." Glancing at his watch, Daniel made an impulsive decision. Thursday's meeting could wait. He needed to see his son, needed to understand what was happening with Ethan. Perhaps his presence could make a difference, even though he felt utterly lost in his role as a father without Emily by his side. He grabbed the keys to his BMW and headed down to the garage. All the way home, a gnawing unease grew in his chest. What if Ethan was suffering more than he realized? What if his constant absence had been hurting his son far more deeply? The mansion's automatic gates opened slowly as Daniel pulled the car into the garage. The 2-story house, with its perfectly manicured garden and heated pool, had always been his pride. It was the symbol of everything he had achieved to give his family the very best. But now, as he stepped through the front door, all he felt was a heavy silence that echoed his loneliness. "Mrs. Thompson?" he called, loosening his tie as he slipped off his suit jacket. Silence. Strange, because the housekeeper always greeted him at the entrance. He set his leather briefcase down in the foyer and walked toward the kitchen, where unusual sounds were coming from. Laughter, childish laughter, the laughter of Ethan. Daniel froze in the kitchen doorway, his breath caught in his throat. For months, Ethan had been a silent shadow, unreachable, broken. Yet now, here he was, standing on a stool, laughing, talking, alive, beside a woman Daniel had never seen before. She had brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail, wore modest work clothes, and smiled warmly as she guided the boy. "Very good, Ethan. Deep bowls go in this stack, flat plates in that one. You're learning so quickly," the woman said in a sweet, patient voice. "I know how to arrange everything, Miss Grace. Look, I can even separate the spoons from the knives," Ethan replied with an enthusiasm Daniel hadn't seen in so long. Daniel swallowed hard. Ethan wasn't just talking naturally, he was happy, truly happy. When was the last time he had seen his son laugh like that? The woman noticed his presence and turned around, startled. "Oh, I'm so sorry. You must be Mr. Whitmore. I'm Grace Miller, the new housekeeper, Mrs. Thompson hired me last week," she explained, wiping her hands on her apron before extending her hand. Daniel shook it, noticing the firmness of her grip and the sincerity in her brown eyes. "A pleasure to meet you, Grace. Where is Mrs. Thompson?" "She went to the supermarket. Ethan was a little restless, so I thought I'd let him help organize the kitchen." "I hope you don't mind," Grace said, a bit nervously. "Daddy's home." Ethan jumped down from the stool and ran toward him, but stopped midway, just as he always did. He had never rushed into his father's arms the way other children did. Miss Grace taught me how to organize everything so neatly. Daniel knelt to his son's level and noticed something different in Ethan's eyes. There was a light there he hadn't seen in a long time. "That's wonderful, son. Do you like helping Miss Grace?" "I like it a lot. She doesn't get mad when I ask too many questions, and she even tells funny stories about when she was little, just like me," Ethan replied, looking at Grace with affection. Daniel lifted his gaze toward the young housekeeper, a strange curiosity stirring inside him. In just 1 week, she had accomplished what 6 professional nannies hadn't been able to do in months. What was it about her that touched the heart of a boy once thought unreachable? As Grace turned back to her chores, Daniel remained there, watching her every gesture with his son. Laughter rang through the kitchen. For the first time in so long, the house was no longer just a place filled with shadows and sorrowful memories. It had become a space alive, warm, and strangely full of life. The image of Ethan's laughter lingered in Daniel's mind long after they left the kitchen. And when evening came, the dinner table, so often weighed down by silence, felt utterly different. Daniel sat down, torn between curiosity and caution. He was used to meals that were hollow, Ethan staring at his plate, pushing food around quietly, while Daniel buried himself in his phone or paperwork. But this time, as soon as the roast chicken was served, Ethan began chattering nonstop. "Daddy, today Miss Grace and I played a guessing game. She let me smell each bottle of cleaner, and I had to guess which one smelled like lemon and which one like apple. I guessed them all right," Ethan exclaimed, his eyes glowing with excitement. Daniel raised his brows, a smile tugging at his lips. It had been so long since he'd seen his son this animated. Grace sat across the table, gently placing food on Ethan's plate, but letting him choose for himself. "Ethan is very observant. When I showed him how to sort the laundry, he even made up a color-counting game. He has such a vivid imagination." Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "And she promised to teach me how to bake cookies this weekend. You'll eat with us, right, Daddy?" The question left Daniel momentarily stunned. A simple invitation, yet it carried his son's yearning to share joy with him. Slowly, Daniel set his phone aside, looked down at the boy, and said softly, "Of course, son. I'd be honored to taste the cookies you make." Throughout the meal, Ethan laughed, talked, and shared little stories. The invisible walls he had built around himself seemed to melt piece by piece. Daniel watched in silence, a strange and powerful feeling swelling in his chest. Hope. Perhaps Grace's presence had unlocked a door he had been unable to open on his own. When Ethan had finally fallen asleep in his small room upstairs, Daniel found Grace tidying up the last of the dishes in the kitchen. The faint scent of toasted bread and lemon cleaner still lingered in the air, while the warm yellow light glowed across her face, giving the space a rare sense of comfort. "Grace, may I have a word with you?" Daniel asked as he stepped closer. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore. Did I do something wrong?" "No, on the contrary," he interrupted gently. "I'm very impressed. In just 1 week, you've managed to do what no one else could. Ethan has never been an easy child, especially after we lost his mother." "How did you do it?" Grace paused, turning toward him with a thoughtful gaze. "You know, Mr. Whitmore, I wasn't trying to do anything special. On the very first day, I saw Ethan hiding under the staircase, clearly avoiding me the way he had with all the other nannies. But instead of trying to coax him out or insisting, I just sat nearby and began talking about how I used to feel when I was little." "What did you tell him?" Daniel asked. "I told him that I, too, used to hide under the stairs whenever I felt sad or scared. I said that sometimes children do that when they feel no one truly understands them. I didn't try to pull him out. I just stayed close, so he would know I was always there." Daniel was moved by her sensitivity. And then he came out? That's right, and when he did, it wasn't because I asked him to, it was because he wanted to. From that moment, our friendship grew naturally. He's a wonderful boy, Mr. Whitmore. He only needs someone who won't try to change him, but who will accept him just as he is. Daniel looked at Grace with growing admiration. There was something about her, something special, that went far beyond any skill with children. The next morning, Daniel decided not to go into the office. He sat in his upstairs study, where he could hear every sound drifting up from below. Ethan's bright laughter echoed through the house like a melody that had been missing for far too long. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the sound soothe a heart calloused by grief. Around 10 o'clock, he came downstairs to make a cup of coffee. In the living room, he stopped at the sight of a peaceful scene. Ethan sat on the rug, surrounded by sheets of paper and crayons. The boy was drawing with deep concentration, occasionally holding up a page for Grace, who was folding laundry on the sofa. "Look what I drew for you," Ethan beamed. Grace set the clothes aside, leaning closer with genuine delight in her eyes. "That's wonderful, Ethan. Who did you draw?" The boy hesitated, then slowly turned the page toward Daniel as he approached. It was a picture of 3 figures, a tall man in a suit, a woman with long hair, and a small child standing between them, all holding hands. "This is our family," Ethan whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. It had been so long since his son mentioned Emily, let alone drew her into a picture. Kneeling down, his voice trembled. "Who's in the picture, Ethan?" "You, me, and Mommy," Ethan said softly, then glanced at Grace as if seeking reassurance. "Miss Grace told me I can remember Mommy whenever I want. I can draw her if I feel like it." Daniel turned to Grace, startled. "You two talk about Emily?" Grace nodded gently. "We talk about many things. Ethan has so many feelings bottled up inside. The other nannies avoided the subject whenever he mentioned his mother, so he eventually stopped bringing her up. But grief doesn't vanish. It only gets buried." Daniel faced his son. "Is that true, Ethan?" The boy nodded timidly. "Some of the nannies told me not to talk about Mommy. Others just changed the subject. But Miss Grace said Mommy will always be in my heart, and it's okay to talk about her whenever I want." The answer cut Daniel like a blade, yet healed him at the same time. Guilt for not realizing it sooner weighed heavy, but relief surged that at last his son had someone who would truly listen. Daniel sank into the sofa across from her, still overwhelmed by the drawing and his son's words. He looked at Grace, who was gently smoothing the paper as if it were a treasure. In her eyes was a softness he had never seen before. "Grace," he asked slowly, curiosity lacing his tone, "how can you talk to Ethan about Emily so naturally? The other nannies avoided it, and I've never dared to bring it up." Grace set the drawing down on the table, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. She hesitated for a moment, then exhaled deeply. "Because I know that feeling, Mr. Whitmore. I lost my mother when I was young, too." Daniel blinked, stunned. "You lost your mother?" She nodded, her gaze drifting far away. "I was 12 when my mom died of cancer. She was everything to me. When she was gone, it felt like my whole world collapsed. For a long time, I was angry, confused, and felt like no one could ever understand my pain." Her voice grew quieter, yet carried a quiet strength. "Luckily, I had my grandmother. She told me once, the ache of missing someone is really just love with no place to go. At first, I thought it was strange, but over time, I realized she was right. Every time I missed my mom, I could either let the sadness consume me, or I could turn that love into care for someone else." Daniel sat frozen, his heart tightening with empathy. He had never heard anyone describe loss in such a way. Grace's lips curved into a gentle smile, her eyes glistening. As a teenager, I started helping my grandmother look after neighborhood kids, especially the ones who cried when their parents were away. And I noticed something. Every time I comforted a child, I felt a warmth inside, as if my mom was still there, teaching me to be gentle. Since then, I've always believed she never really left. She lives in every act of kindness I give to others. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. Now he understood why Ethan had found comfort in Grace so quickly. She wasn't just doing her job, she truly understood what it meant to be a child grieving for a mother, because she had once been that child herself. "Grace," he said softly, voice heavy with emotion, "now I see. It isn't just because you're kind or patient. It's because you really see Ethan. In a way, I haven't." She lowered her head, her tone quiet yet steady. "Ethan is an incredible little boy, Mr. Whitmore. He just needs someone to accept his longing, to let him know that loving and remembering his mom is normal, and that speaking of her is part of healing." Her words echoed in Daniel's mind like a profound reminder. Inside him rose a feeling of both admiration and gratitude for this woman, the one who had brought light into a place he thought would remain dark forever. A week after that conversation, Daniel left work earlier than usual. He wanted to spend more time with Ethan and also observe the mysterious bond growing between his son and Grace. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed the front door slightly ajar. His heart quickened, half anxious, half curious. Stepping inside, he heard the sound of muffled laughter drifting from the backyard. Following it through the kitchen and out onto the porch, Daniel froze at the sight before him. Ethan and Grace were sitting under the old maple tree, surrounded by photographs, scattered papers, and, most strikingly, a wooden chest he knew all too well. It was Emily's memory chest, the one Daniel had never dared to open since the funeral. "Look at your mom here, Ethan. That smile is so radiant," Grace said softly, handing the boy an old photo of Emily, cradling him as a newborn. "She's so beautiful," Ethan whispered, his tiny finger brushing across his mother's face in the picture. Blood rushed to Daniel's face. He strode forward, his voice sharper than he intended. "What exactly is going on here?" Grace jumped to her feet, clearly anxious. "Mr. Whitmore, I can explain. Ethan asked me if I knew where his mother's photographs were, and I told him I didn't. He led me to this chest and said he knew there were pictures inside, but no one had ever opened it with him." "And you thought you could go through my wife's private belongings without permission?" Daniel's voice came out sharper than he intended. "Don't be mad at Miss Grace, Dad," Ethan interjected, rushing to stand between them. "I was the one who asked her to look at the pictures with me. She said she would only open it if you allowed it, but I told her you never wanted to look at Mom's things with me." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. It was true. Every time Ethan had asked to talk about Emily or to see her belongings, Daniel had avoided it, changing the subject, deflecting, or saying it wasn't the right time. "Mr. Whitmore," Grace said gently, "I should have asked you first, and I apologize for that. But Ethan is desperate to know more about his mother. He told me he hardly remembers her face, only her voice when she used to sing him lullabies." Daniel looked at the open chest and saw dozens of photographs scattered inside. Emily pregnant, Emily holding newborn Ethan, Emily teaching him his first steps, Emily smiling at their last birthday together. Beautiful memories he had buried beneath layers of pain. "Look, Dad, Mom made the same silly face I do when I eat broccoli," Ethan said, holding up a photo of Emily pulling a goofy expression. For the first time in 2 years, Daniel laughed while looking at a picture of Emily. And in that moment, he realized something surprising. Grace had not desecrated his wife's memory at all. She had simply unlocked the door, giving him and his son permission to touch those precious memories without fear. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep clutching a photograph of Emily for the first time in 2 years, Daniel found Grace in the kitchen, preparing a light meal for the boys next day. She worked quietly, clearly still troubled about the chest. "I owe you an apology," Daniel said as he stepped closer. "My reaction was unfair. You did something I should have done long ago." She stopped slicing the sandwich and looked at him. "Mr. Whitmore, I understand your reaction. I crossed a line and—" "No," he cut her off firmly. "You did what was necessary. I was the coward. I've been so busy avoiding my own pain that I forgot Ethan needed to go through his as well." Grace sighed, leaning back against the counter. "You know, when my mother died, my grandmother told me something I've never forgotten. My dear, when we hide our tears, we also hide our love. Ethan needs to cry for his mother, to remember her, to talk about her. That's how a child learns to carry her love in a healthy way." "And what about me?" Daniel's voice broke. "How can I be strong enough for him if I still fall apart every time I look at her picture?" Grace stepped closer, her eyes full of compassion. "You don't have to be strong alone, Mr. Whitmore. Ethan doesn't need a perfect father. He needs a true father, a father who also remembers, who also cries, who also loves Emily's memory." Daniel's eyes grew wet. "Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying her by moving on, by even imagining happiness again." "Emily would want you both to be happy," Grace said firmly. "A mother who loved as deeply as she clearly did in those photographs would never want you trapped in grief forever." "How can you be so sure?" he asked. Grace hesitated, as if making a difficult decision. Because I've grown so attached to you and Ethan that sometimes I feel guilty. I should have kept a professional distance, but I couldn't. Ethan has become like a son to me. And you—" She stopped, her cheeks flushing. "And me?" Daniel pressed, his heart racing. "You've become someone very special to me, and I know that's not appropriate. I'm just your employee, and you're both still grieving, but I can't control the feelings I've developed for this family." Daniel took another step closer. "Grace, you're not just anything. You saved my son. You brought me back to him. And the feelings you just spoke of, I feel them too." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Both knew they had crossed an invisible line, acknowledging feelings that would change everything between them. Grace lowered her gaze to her hands, clearly struggling with the weight of it all. "This is so complicated, Mr. Whitmore." "Just call me Daniel," he whispered. "And yes, it is complicated, but for the first time in 2 years, something in my life finally feels meaningful again." Before he could say more, they heard the sound of tiny bare feet padding down the staircase. Ethan appeared in the kitchen, clutching a photo of Emily to his chest, his eyes still red from tears. "Daddy, I just had a nightmare," he whispered, then ran straight into Grace's arms, a habit that had already taken root. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. Grace sat down with Ethan, gently stroking his messy hair. "Tell me, Ethan, what did you dream about?" "I dreamed that Mom was singing me a lullaby, like she used to. But when I tried to hug her, she disappeared, and I was left all alone in a big, dark house." Ethan sobbed between hiccups. Grace looked at Daniel, and he stepped closer, kneeling beside them both. "Ethan, you're not alone. I'm here, and so is Grace." "But what if you both disappear too, just like Mom did?" he asked, revealing his deepest fear. Daniel's heart shattered. "Son, I will never leave you. I promise." "Mom also promised she would come back after her trip, but she never did," Ethan replied, his words carrying a heartbreaking maturity for his age. At that moment, Grace did something unexpected. She began to hum softly a melody that Daniel recognized instantly. It was Emily's favorite lullaby, the one she had sung to Ethan every night. "How do you know that song?" Daniel asked in surprise. Grace stopped singing and looked at him, her eyes glistening. "Ethan asked me to sing it a few nights ago. He told me his mom always sang it and taught me the tune until I learned it by heart. I hope you don't mind." Daniel watched as Ethan completely relaxed in Grace's arms while she continued to sing. The boy closed his eyes, his breathing steady, for the first time since coming down the stairs. "Miss Grace," Ethan murmured sleepily, "you sing just like Mom used to, as if she's here, singing through you." The child's words felt like a revelation to Daniel. It wasn't a coincidence that Grace had come to them at the very moment they needed her most. It wasn't mere luck that she instinctively knew how to reach Ethan's heart. There was something greater at work here, something he couldn't explain with logic. "Ethan," Daniel said softly, "would you like Grace to stay here tonight, just to make sure the nightmare doesn't come back?" The boy opened his eyes with hope. "Could you, Miss Grace? You could sleep in the living room, and if I have a nightmare, you could come to me?" Grace looked at Daniel, saw him nod, and smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll stay." As they carried Ethan back to his room, Daniel realized this makeshift family had become more real and more solid than many traditional families he had ever known. And for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where Grace was not just a temporary employee, but a permanent part of their lives. After that night's nightmare, Daniel began to change even more. He cut back his hours, came home earlier, and tried to be present in every moment of his son's life. Breakfast was no longer rushed slices of toast, but a ritual where the three of them sat together, sharing little stories. Ethan seemed like a different child. He ran, he laughed, and most of all, he no longer feared speaking of his mother. He shared memories Daniel never knew he carried, memories Grace had encouraged him to recall. Each time, Daniel felt both a sting of pain and a wave of healing. He was learning how to listen, how to let his son know that love for Emily would never be forgotten. One morning, as they sat eating cereal, Ethan suddenly looked up with a seriousness far beyond his years. "Daddy, I want Miss Grace to be my new mommy." The spoon froze in Daniel's hand. Grace stiffened too, her cheeks flushed crimson. Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. "Ethan," Daniel spoke carefully, "that isn't as simple as you think." "But why not?" Ethan asked immediately, his eyes wide with sincerity. "You like Miss Grace? I like her. She likes us. So why can't we be a real family?" Grace quickly rose, using the excuse of clearing the table to mask her unease. Her voice trembled. "Ethan, sweetheart, we'll talk about this later. I need to get back to work." Daniel caught the turmoil in her eyes. After Ethan left the table to get ready for school, he followed her into the laundry room. She was folding clothes hurriedly, as though hiding behind the task. "Grace," he said softly, "we need to talk." She didn't look up. Her voice choked. "I think maybe it's time for me to find another job." Ethan is confused. He's building unhealthy expectations. "And what if it isn't just a child's expectation?" Daniel said, stepping in front of her. "What if it's the real feeling inside all of us?" Grace finally lifted her eyes, tears brimming. "We can't play with the emotions of a child who's already suffered so much. What if this doesn't work out? What if you realize it's only gratitude for what I've done for Ethan? He would be hurt all over again." "Grace, what I feel isn't gratitude. It's love," Daniel said, surprising even himself with his courage. "I've fallen in love with the woman who sings lullabies at 3 a.m, who turns chores into games, who understands the heart of a child better than any psychologist ever could." "Daniel," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You've taught me that I can honor the past while still building a future. Emily will always have a place in my heart, but so will a new love." Grace let him hold her, finally allowing herself to feel what she had been suppressing for weeks. "What if I can't be the mother Ethan needs?" "You already are," Daniel said, kissing her forehead. "You are everything he needs, and everything we both need." From the hallway came Ethan's cheerful voice. "Dad, Mom, stop talking and come give me a family hug already." "I know you like each other." They laughed through their tears and stepped toward the boy, who stood with his arms wide open. As the three of them embraced, Daniel was certain that Emily, wherever she was smiling at them. And as the three of them held each other close, the once empty house no longer felt hollow, but filled with love. 3 months later, the atmosphere in the Whitmore home had completely transformed. Laughter echoed through every room. Breakfasts brimmed with stories instead of silence. Daniel remained busy with his architecture firm, but now he arranged his schedule to return home early, choosing family over projects. One weekend afternoon, the three of them spread a blanket beneath the old maple tree, the same place where so many memories had begun. Ethan ran circles around them while Daniel and Grace unpacked a small picnic basket. As the golden light of sunset bathed the garden, Daniel suddenly reached for Grace's hand. "Grace," he began, his voice trembling yet sincere, "the day you walked into this house, you brought back what I thought I'd lost forever. Laughter, hope, and love. Not only for Ethan, but for me as well. Today, under this tree, where everything started, I want to ask you something." From the basket he pulled a velvet box, opening it to reveal a shining ring. Ethan clapped his hands, his eyes wide with excitement. "Miss Grace, please marry Daddy. I want us to be a family forever." Grace's breath caught, tears streaming down her cheeks as she laughed through her sobs. "Yes, Daniel, I will." 2 months later, their wedding took place in the garden, adorned with white flowers and twinkling lights. It wasn't lavish or crowded, just a simple ceremony overflowing with love. Ethan, dressed in a tiny suit, proudly walked beside his father and handed Grace the ring. When Daniel kissed his bride, Ethan shouted with joy, "Now I have both a daddy and a mommy." The applause and radiant smiles sealed the moment forever. Married life unfolded in peace. Daniel had never imagined he could find such contentment again. Evenings spent cooking together, Sunday mornings strolling through the park, bursts of laughter over the dinner table. Ethan blossomed into a lively, confident boy, proud to tell his friends he had Mommy Grace, the mother who had come into his life like a miracle. A year after the wedding, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Holding the tiny infant in his arms, Daniel wept, not from sorrow, but from pure joy. Ethan sat by the bed, eyes shining. "I'll be the best big brother. I'll protect her, just like Daddy protects me and Mommy Grace." They named her Lily Emily Whitmore, Lily for purity, and Emily to honor the mother who had passed, yet remained forever part of their family. Watching his wife cradle their daughter, Daniel felt his heart whole again. He knew Emily, somewhere beyond, was smiling too. The house that once echoed with silence now rang with newborn cries, joyous laughter, and boundless love. And in that miraculous circle of life, Daniel realized the truth. Tragedy had not ended their story. It had carved the path to a new beginning. What once was a house of silence now rang with laughter, lullabies, and love. A family once broken was now whole.